Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am Anatoly Shevchenko on behalf of the Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform. Welcome all the journalists highlighting the Ukraine's fight for freedom. Today we are hosting Oleksandr Merezhko, the head of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation. The topic of today's talk is the recent presidential visit to London, Brussels, and Paris. What is the aim of this tour at this particular point in time? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. To begin with, this has proved to be a historic visit of historical proportion. And indeed, it was a series of visits. And it is very symbolic that he started off with the United Kingdom. Great Britain is our best friend and is our best country that supports us. Then he went to the capital of the United Europe, met such persons as Ursula von der Leyen. He also met German Chancellor and the French President. If I were to highlight what was most important, we know that this has been urged by the need to provide Ukraine with serious weaponry at this particular point in time. Secondly, what is important here is that more than once we highlighted the point that European Union will be helping and assisting Ukraine as long as it is necessary. So we have to say that, I would say it this way, because of the personal contacts of the Ukrainian president with the heads of the countries from the European Union, he has been successful in persuading them to be very consistent and principled and adhere to principles of overcoming Russia's invasion. Let us zero in on every particular step. London, Great Britain, we know that it was very important to cement the contacts between the two leaders. The tanks and the fighter jets perhaps were on the agenda. What has drawn your attention in the first place? I would draw your attention to the so-called London Declaration signing. It was a follow-up to the agreement on partnership between Great Britain and Ukraine, and that declaration has been followed up. It has a very significant political meaning. First of all, we are hopeful that we will get the fighter jets, which is important in itself, but then our pilots and tank operators will be trained. This is very important and symbolic. Second point, France and Germany. I believe everyone draws the parallel with what had happened 9-10 years ago when France and Germany fathered and mothered the so-called Minsk format with all the essence and liabilities of that process. What would be your characteristic of the importance of the meeting with the leaders of these two countries? Most important in these meetings was that the leaders of these countries, and I hope it will be done unconditionally from now on, they have supported Ukraine. They have officially declared that Ukraine should be assisted and helped until the victory is secured against Russia. I singled out a particular phrase when French President Macron, he seems to have changed. His rhetoric is more consistent and more decisive. This is important in itself, and I think it comes as a result of the personal meetings of the presidents. What has changed in the politics of France and Germany? I think the most important point here is that we are gaining an upper hand. Strategically, Russia has failed. Everyone understands that Russia has failed to win over Ukraine in the battlefield. Now Ukraine is looking more and more as a victorious side. This seems to be an argument in the change of the position stance of President Macron, which means they have the belief in us when previously they had some misgivings. And I think this support of France and Germany will be growing on. United Europe. When we hear from the European Union that we are excited by the pace of the Ukrainian reforms on their way to European accession, what's your take on this? Is the glass half full or half empty? You see, when we talk about the glass, in terms of physics, it's always full because half of the glass may seem to be filled with water, but on a serious side, the other is filled with the oxygen. But I believe, jokes aside, that the glass is more than half full. Europe seems to have suggested, and they have verbalized it, including Ursula von der Leyen, something to the effect that Ukraine is viewed as a de facto member of the European Union. It looks to me that they have accepted and they have made up their minds in terms of their stance towards Ukraine. The question here is that Ukraine lives up to all the recommendations and requirements for a aspiring membership. And I have no doubt that Ukraine will be, in the nearest future, member of the European Union. My last question is about the stylistics of the presidential speeches, remarks, and his visits. I would like to ask you what you hear from other European members of parliament. Is this a defiant stance, this blunt petitions, this fiery rhetoric, an impassioned plea for weaponry? How is it received in the partner countries? I have heard some feedback from English colleagues, from British MPs, not in a direct way. By my understanding is that, especially in Great Britain, President Zelensky's visit has been admired. We might draw a parallel with the Second World War. That is to say, President Zelensky today is viewed as a leader of the free world, defending the countries of democracy from a major threat to this world. The style of his, the diplomatic style that is so characteristic for him, I would say that he is frank and full of humility. These are the traits that I believe to be very typical and specific to President Zelensky. This cannot fail but to trigger the warm feelings towards him personally and towards Ukraine as a country that is a shield from Russian aggression for the whole Europe. European public, European politicians are beginning to see this war that we are waging against their aggressor as a joint effort, as a joint war against the evil empire. Questions from the floor?
Yes, Mr. Zelensky is now maybe the most appreciated political leader in the world, and his speeches are amazing. But I remember a scene from the movie Servant of the People. A scene where the President Goloborodko was called by mistake at that moment by Chancellor Merkel, and he had a short discussion on the phone, and she said, "Congratulations for your ascension to EU." But she wanted to call Montenegro, not Ukraine. And that scene it's beautiful. It's an amazing scene. But how And of course, the President Goloborodko was very disappointed that it was about Montenegro, not Ukraine. But it's a huge evolution from that point of uncertainty regarding the ascension of Ukraine to EU, and now this very well acclamation of Mr. Zelensky in Brussels, in Paris, in London. Even UK is not in EU, but it's also a very important European country. How can you describe this evolution from a desire to becoming a member of EU and now in these harsh conditions of the war, Mr. Zelensky and Ukraine is the main topic in the last year, is the main European and world topic?
You mean evolution here? Or
evolution of Mr. Zelensky as a public person and evolution of the Ukraine, how it is perceived at the in the world and at the European level in the last 7-8 years.
The world is very dynamic today, so is Ukraine. Ukraine is undergoing changes. This cannot be declined. And it goes without saying that the Rubicon line here was the date of the 24th of February. I believe that in such a dangerous situation, people show what they really are. Countries show what they really are. They show to the world their essence, so that Ukraine has shown to the world what it is, in essence, a defying, a brave country fighting a war against a giant, a geopolitical giant. But we are winning. We are referencing the Bible. We are talking about David and Goliath. The same goes for the President Zelensky. He has shown to the world the traits of character that were concealed from himself and from the world. In these extraordinary times, we have seen his talents of an organizer, a talent of a warrior, a talent of a diplomat, and I am not going to conceal those traits. If there are no more questions from the floor, I will wrap up my conversation with the Oleksandr, head of the Parliamentary Committee on Interparliamentary Committee. Sir, thank you very much for this exchange. Journalists are invited to follow our agenda. In 15 minutes' time, we will begin a briefing by the spokesman of the Air Force of Ukraine, and keep with our agenda. Stand with Ukraine.